I said, actually, Mom, I identify as queer. And there was this about a 15-second hesitation, and I just let it hang because it was at that moment I needed her to feel the depth. And she said, really?
Hello and welcome to Out Loud. Out Loud is a podcast by and for queer people of faith in the South. Here we tell our stories of varied religious upbringings, messy coming outs, and the gift of community with one another. I'm your host, Greg Thompson, and the voice you just heard was Reverend Don Bennett. Don is a queer female Lutheran pastor recently ordained in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, also known as ELCA. Her family is truly, as she would say, a rainbow family. Her own siblings, as well as her own children, have come out to her throughout her life. We delve into a discussion about her coming out later in life and responding to a call to be a pastor 20 years after she had first heard it. Dawn is a proud, queer woman who has come into her own and accepted her entire self. She now serves the Nashville and Middle Tennessee areas through a new ELCA Lutheran collective called The Table. The Table is one of our community partners here on the show and promotes spiritual well-being for LGBTQIA+ and minority people groups in the exploration of self, faith, community, and the deeper issues of being and belonging. The Table affirms all gender identities, gender presentations, and sexual orientations. At The Table, your preferred pronouns will be honored. The transgender group meets twice a month, and a dinner and devotion will be coming later this summer. And there's pastoral mediation available for help with conflict resolution. To learn more, visit thetablnashville.org. And to learn more about our other partners and view this episode's transcript and resources, head on over to OutLoudStories.com. And now, let's hear from Reverend Don Bennett. Thank you for agreeing to be on the show today. I'm so excited to chat. Could you tell me about what your faith experience was like growing up?
Actually, my faith experience growing up was, as I remember it as a little person, great. I always had a sense of Jesus in my heart. Never once did I ever feel ashamed or away from God. One of the beautiful gifts that I got from my years living in the Catholic tradition is this wonderful sense of reverence. And I think in lesser liturgical environments, that reverence sometimes gets a little bit overshadowed. That being said, that same reverence and high liturgy can be traumatizing to people. So I'm very sensitive to that. All I can say for Dawn is that when I close my eyes, I can still hear the communion bells ringing that the altar boys used to ring at the words of institution. We don't utilize those in the Lutheran Church, but it's so near and dear to me because every time I hear a gong, it brings me back to that moment, and it's such a holy moment for me. So I carry that with me. My father was a deacon in the Catholic Church, and so that happened in my teenage years. But I do remember some of my elder siblings running me to Mass on the weekends. Where it turned for me is when I began to seriously embrace the harm that the church did by its strict doctrines to my siblings. I have 2 gay brothers and a lesbian sister, and being raised in a Catholic tradition became problematic when I began to not look the other way. at the ways in which the Catholic teachings singled them out and then excluded them. It still kind of puzzles me how I made it this long without coming out. I've been out a handful of years now, but when I was a young girl in middle school, I had experiences with other girls, and I had experiences with boys. Back then, we were much, there was no talk of beyond the binary. That's the world that I lived in.
Yeah.
So I've always had crushes on lots of different kinds of people, but I was raised in a household. I don't know if it's linked to religion or not, but certainly homophobia played its part. I was raised, my sister and I both, to grow up, get married, pump out a few kids, and get a job. That's what I did.
Yeah.
And so I spent many years married to a man, a straight white man, and I'm only in the last 15 years realizing how harmful that experience was in my life and continues to be. And so my coming out was part of my comeback story from leaving an emotionally and verbally abusive marriage. It was part of my coming into myself. And my coming out as queer, for those who need technical, I'm pansexual. But I use queer because it fits me well, and it feels comfortable, and it gives me the freedom to be who I am. And it also invites conversation.
It does, yeah.
It's important for me to live a life of, especially as a pastor, communication and conversation. And if I give one word explicit answers, the conversation stops because people get all the information they need. But if I'm deliberately a little bit vague or a little bit elusive, people are more invited into responding in their curiosity. And that's how we build relationships, in my opinion.
So let's walk back a little bit. What was, when you were in the process of coming out, was that during your marriage, after? Where did that kind of land? Or was it gradual throughout all of that time?
Well, that too is complicated. Yeah. I have 3 children, and my second child came out as lesbian in high school.
Yeah.
Prior to that time, I saw the signs. Their dad saw the signs. And we had a lot of conversation. Most parents, I really cannot get on board with somebody being a complete surprise. It's just, your child. If you're paying attention from the womb on, you at least get an inkling. And so, but my child's dad said, if she's gay, if she's lesbian, it's your fault because you have gay siblings. Jeez. And I just said, that is the most ignorant statement I think I've ever heard.
Did you say that to him?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And it caused a hostile argument. And I probably could have been a little more diplomatic and gentle, but I think, that fire was fueled by knowing that I have gay siblings and having to go back and forth, particularly with my mom, and people around me about having to defend my siblings quietly.
And were you at a point of affirming your siblings by that point?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And absolutely. I've never not affirmed my siblings. I just said some things that were problematic in their own right.
Yeah.
And that was my ignorance and my areas where my growing edges, right?
Yeah.
I think at that point, I looked in the mirror and knew that I had been attracted to female identified persons my whole life. And I didn't have a problem with it, and I didn't really think God had a problem with it. But my reality at that time was that I was married to a straight man, and I'm monogamous. And so it just didn't seem profitable to even have a conversation because I wasn't going to change my marital status. At that point, I was deep in the throes of unhealthy relations where codependency played its part. And so it was kind of a go along to get along. And I think a lot of queer people find themselves in that environment for a variety of reasons.
So you were asking all those questions around the time your daughter came out, or kind of in response to that?
No, yeah, I think it's fair to say that I was faced with my own personhood, and I had to decide which direction I was going to go. Part of my truth as a parent is that I believe that I have the children I have because God saw it fit to bring me these particular children. There's billions of children, and I got these 3. And it's because God decided that I was the fit person to give birth to them and bring them life into the world. So I've never had an issue with who my children are, right? Particularly my trans son. I came out as queer in seminary, and this is post-divorce. It was part of my getting real with myself and doing my own healing work and doing my own crisis intervention, through the means that are available, counseling and self-help and prayer, meditation, all those sorts of things. We go through periods of willingness to be vulnerable, and then we go through periods of strength where we're going to do it scared. And affirming my entire self is a commitment that I made. And I think that it is fair to say that I pigtailed off of my child's being out in the world. So when I came out officially, the first 3 people I came out to were my children. And the next 3 people I came out to were my siblings. And of course, those 2 groups are in line behind coming out to myself and coming out to God. Yeah.
How did they respond?
My children, all of them, well, my transgender son got a big smile and said, "Welcome to the club." I thought that was kind of cute. My older son and my daughter, they basically said, "Mom, you know what? You, be happy, be healthy, be whole. And this is not a shock. And it's no big deal to us. I mean, we already have gay uncles and a gay aunt. Now we got a gay mom." I was like, all right, cool. And it almost was like a speed bump, how you see it coming, you go over it slowly, and then you get on with your life. And that's how it's been. I only came out to my mother 2 weeks before ordination, however.
That was recent.
That's very recent, and people don't know that part of the story because I keep it quiet, but until today.
How did that go?
Well, it's fair to say that I can only say how it went from my side of the story.
Sure.
And it was somber. So my mother has come a very long way. The first kid she kicked out of the house. Right. The second kid lived several thousand miles away. So it was stick it under the carpet. But the third kid to come out was the baby of the family, the golden boy. And so that went much better, not only for him, but, just in terms of family dynamics. And all of my siblings have been out 20 plus years. Yeah. Some of them, 50 plus years. So the one the one caveat to this story is that when I came out to my siblings, I wanted to come out to my mom.
Yeah.
And we had some conversation around it. I was in seminary, and seminary will wreck you. It systematically breaks down every foundational wall that you've deliberately built up.
Correct.
to make sure that do they need to be erected, and if they don't, what needs to go in their place. And
Well said.
Right. And so it was in seminary that I did this deconstruction work and reconstruction work. And part of that reconstruction was to come face to face with the woman who birthed me and claim my autonomy as a God-given gift, and also as a child of God who was purposefully and wonderfully created. And so I put that to my siblings, and they were in disagreement. They collectively, we had a great phone call, 4 of us on the phone together. It's a conference call so that everybody could hear from, their lips to our ears and vice versa. And they collaboratively suggested that I do not come out because it was not going to profit my mother anything. She's in her 80s, and she's still a devout Catholic. She still believes that it's a choice. She lights a candle for their soul every day. She prays for them every day. And of course, by this time, I had a transgender child who she struggled to figure out what to do with that. And so they just said, I don't think it's going to profit you or Mom any to come out, especially since you live, several states apart. And so, much to my chagrin, I did not come out to my mother. But I have to be honest and say that over the years, if I had guilt about anything, it's from keeping that secret from my mother, because Scripture says you have to honor your mom and dad. And it became apparent to my heart that I was being dishonorable to my mom by keeping this from her. And again, I don't need her permission or her acceptance. So for me, it was more a matter of everybody who knows me knows I'm queer. I have a public career. I have a public life. I'm out to my children. I'm out to my siblings. I'm out to all my friends. I mean, it's cost me dearly, but nonetheless, everybody who knows me knows.
Yeah.
Everybody in seminary knows. My mother's the only living human on the planet that didn't know. And I thought, no, this is not going to work. And when I knew that ordination was coming, I went back to the seat with my siblings, and I said, listen, I'm not going to do that to her. She is not going to roll in here at my ordination and find out from all of these people.
Oh, gosh, no, that'd be hard.
And disrespectful. And so I started praying about a year ago for God to open a window. And I didn't know how it was going to go, but every time I was in a conversation with my mom, I was on the lookout for God saying, over here, Dawn, here's your space, And about 2 weeks before ordination, the space opened up, and it's to my mother's credit, and it shows her willingness to grow. I believe that the transition of her grandchild from female to male has played a pivotal role for her, much more than I even know. Never once has she misgendered him. But I do believe that her willingness to think about it, to pray about it, to maybe wrestle with all of that, provided an opportunity for her to get interested in my work, particularly my advocacy work as a pastor. And so she asked me, in her queer Boston language, she says, so what is queer? And so I went into just naturally fall into my LGBT 101, about the 3 uses of the word queer, as a verb and as a lens to look through the world, and as a sexual orientation. And And so I have a tendency to talk about it, the same pattern, which the first is as an umbrella term for all LGBTQIA plus persons, right?
Yeah.
That can get to be a really long acronym that sometimes people get lost when you use it. And so I explained to her about the umbrella term, and that it's no longer derogatory. It's being revived in a holistic and healthy way, powerful way. And then I naturally went into the queering of a lens, which at Vanderbilt Divinity School encompassed about 90% of my work, is the lens, the queer lens of queer theology and queer activism and queer life and queer parenting. And so she got that. And then she said, now the Q, that's queer. And so the Q part is that she says, I get the L, and she put my sister's name. Yep. And I get the G, and she used my brother's names. Yep. And I get the T, and she put my son's name. Yep. Now what's the Q? Queer. I said, yes, Mom. And actually, and this was the holy moment, Greg. This was the silence, and I saw it coming. I was like, God, you got the greatest buildup of anybody I know. I said, actually, Mom, I identify as queer. And there was this about a 15-second hesitation, and I just let it hang because it was at that moment I needed her to feel the depth. And she said, really? And I said, yes, really. And what this means for me is, and then I proceeded to back up in my life and say, I've had experiences with girls and women. I've had experiences with boys and men. Yeah. And I've had experiences with people who are beyond the binary. And so, and I said, I never said anything about it because I was married to a man and I'm monogamous. So there was no reason for me to open up that Pandora's box if I wasn't going to pursue anything. I said, but I have to be honest and say that since my divorce and since rebuilding my life, since working through codependency and all of the work that I've done and raising my son through transition, it's important for me to claim every aspect of myself. And she listened very intently. She listened. And then I felt compelled to say to her, Mom, the reality is never once have I felt not even an iota of shame for who God made me to be. Never. I never have, and I never will. And she said to me, we both practice, many people in my family practice 12-step recovery. I practice it for codependency and because there are addicts in my life, and it keeps me in relationship with them. Yeah. And my mom, same way. And so she said to me, well, I will light a candle because nothing in this crazy family surprises me anymore. I said, okay. And she said, you know what? Also, God will help me accept the things I cannot change. And that was the end of the conversation, and I let that be the end of the conversation. Yeah. I think if anything was hurtful, that was it. Because for me, it was laced with, I don't accept you, I don't approve of this. And there's nothing that I can do about it. That's not my work to do. That's her work to do. Yeah,
that is double-edged, for sure. Because it almost has this subtext of like wanting to change. But at the same time, there is this like desire to accept and understand almost too. Yeah. That's an interesting
part of it.
Tough prayer.
It's a very tough prayer, but I understood it because this is what is so true about partially why my siblings encouraged me not to come out. Being raised Catholic, my mother had a little bit of a heartache when each of her children walked away from the Catholic Church. She had a little bit of a heartache when I walked away because she knows that my faith is so important to me. And when I first told her about the call of God in my life to become a pastor and that I was leaving the secular world, quitting my job, going to seminary, she said, and I quote, well, I don't believe in female pastors, but I support you, Dawn. She doesn't remember saying it, but she did say it. And I remember it so verbatim that has been an albatross around my neck for many years. A couple of years ago, when she got interested in my preaching because she realized there was a little buzz around it, she thought, maybe I should hear some of this. So she started asking me to record my sermons. And so I did. And I send them to her, and she gives me her feedback. She always corrects me when I say she for God and the Holy Spirit. And we have conversation about that. And she says, well, I'll ask Father Joe. Okay, you do that. It's funny. It's cute. But interestingly, I believe another grace moment is it's been through listening to my sermons and my preaching that she came to believe the call of God on my life to become a pastor. My siblings said, you know what? She's working on having a pastor for a daughter. Having a queer pastor or having a queer daughter, that's a mind bender.
Yeah.
So let's just go slow. But my reality is I am a queer female Lutheran pastor. That defines all of my self-identifiers, so to speak, barring the motherhood and everything. But, it's part of who I am. And you can struggle to have a pastor for a daughter. If the Catholic Church ordained women, it wouldn't be an issue. And you can struggle having a queer person as a daughter. That's your issue. And if you choose to struggle having a queer pastor for a daughter, that too is your issue. But it's not going to stop me from what God has called me to do.
I love that your ministry has sparked some conversation with her, and I think that's I think it's so easy in this day and age to just cast out people who disagree with us. We see that in a lot of places, and I love that you two are talking. I think that's beautiful.
She's willing to stay in the conversation.
Yeah.
And like many folks in the straight community, I honor that.
Yeah.
I don't honor cutting people off, right? Because we all have growing edges. And someone's growth journey is it's as personal as your faith journey. And I love my mom. And the reality is she loves her family.
How was your faith journey kind of changing and shifting from when you were in your marriage to eventually becoming a pastor? You said you became Lutheran before you got divorced. What was shifting there? How did you land there?
So when I moved to Tennessee, my two youngest were toddlers, babies, in fact. And my oldest son was in elementary school. And it was the reason why I transitioned to the Lutheran Church is because when we talked about beginning family, I made it very crystal clear that it was my intention to raise my children in an active faith life. It was important to me. And I felt that I had a responsibility to help them understand my understanding of where they came from and why they're special in this world, and particularly through the lens of the Christian faith, for all the problems that it has. But by God's grace, we go forward. But their dad adamantly said, you could take him anywhere but the Catholic Church. Well, that was my only option because it's all I knew.
Was he Lutheran or was he?
He's a cradle Lutheran, but he never practiced past confirmation. And so, but he played the role, I think, to pacify me. And in his defense, I think he really tried to make a go of it. When I realized that my options were his tradition or my tradition, because that's what made sense. The age-old running joke is that Lutherans are just diet Catholics.
Right. Yeah. Not a huge leap.
Not a huge leap. And I embarked on the journey of becoming a member of the Lutheran Church. And it's always been the ELCA. And so I understood it. I resonated with it. It was comfortable and fitting, and it provided a good framework to raise a family in. And when I moved to Tennessee, and in 1997, I was on staff.
At the church?
Yep, I was
wow.
directing the preschool program.
Okay.
My two participated in it, and we built it up, and it became a major outreach for South Nashville for pre-K kids. And I knew that I was called then, and my dad was still alive. And so I called my dad and I said, am I crazy? Because this is what's happening. He said, no, you're not crazy, but you need to talk to your husband because ministry is a family affair. And I thought, he knows this because he was a deacon in the church and he went to seminary when I was in high school. And I'm one of 6 kids, so he gets it,
Yeah.
It's a family affair. So I did. I went and talked to my then husband, and he said, I did not sign up to be a pastor's spouse. That was devastating because I did not know what to do with that. I mean, it's very ominous when you have to tell God no.
That's a pretty hard absolute to throw out there.
Absolute. Oh my goodness. It was terrible. So we talked and argued. I lost. And I went back to my dad and he said, well, raising a family is ministry. That's ministry. And don't short that. Because seminary it's a difficult road and your kids are young and you need the support. So I told God, either you have to change his heart or I need to take a rain check. Well, almost 20 years to the month, knock, knock, knock. My children are grown. I just recently got back on my feet financially and, I have a paycheck and insurance and all the things that make life go. So I went back to my dad, who was still living at the time. And I said, Dad, am I crazy? He said, oh, no, you're not crazy. I said, oh, no. And the rest, as they say, is history. But within a year, I found myself at Vanderbilt Divinity School and trying to figure out how to do this thing as a single person. It was such a difficult, seminary, as I mentioned earlier, wrecks you. But for me, I had the support of my kids. I had the support of my family. I had the support of my dad. My dad was my rock. And then I had the support of my partner because my dad gave me the same advice the second time. Go talk to your partner. Ministry is a family affair. Mm-hmm. So I did. And my partner said, absolutely, go. And I was like, seriously? So what do? You quit your job and you go. Okay. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, I guess.
Yeah.
But while in seminary, I incurred 3 devastating losses. My partner left 2 weeks after I quit my job and started seminary. My partner left, leaving me in a house by myself and no means of financial support. My second year of seminary, my father passed away.
Oh, my goodness.
Yep. And my final year, my academic advisor, who was my mentor in ministry, passed away.
Wow.
So I started at Vanderbilt with a huge hedge of protection, and I ended up on bloody stumps by myself. But I can't really say by myself because God's providence is there. And the people that I met there literally formed a blanket around me that held me together and pushed, pulled, and dragged me all the way through. And then after Vanderbilt, as a Lutheran pastor, you have to do a Lutheran year. So I was at Luther Seminary in Minnesota, which that too was a gift. My younger brother, my gay younger brother, happens to live 6 miles from the seminary. So I had a place to stay. Yeah. He didn't even know at the time. It was just, God's got jokes. What are you going to do? Some of them are hilarious. Some of them are not so fun. Some of them are satire, I guess. I don't know.
in the last few months, working up to your ordination, you've been rolling out a new kind of church called The Table.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that is and what it's going to be? And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So The Table is a new forming community of faith. And essentially, it's a place where people can come as their full self. My work as a pastor, as a mission, officially I'm called a development pastor because I'm developing a new community. And so oftentimes people want to be part of a larger faith family. Mm-hmm. And so part of my work, because I don't have a brick and mortar, I'm all over the place. Part of my task, as I see it, is to connect people who want a place to go to Sunday school, who want a place to do potluck, who want a place to go to church, however you interpret church. And I have at my access 15 Lutheran churches. All of them are open and affirming of LGBTQ persons and persons who are used to living on the fringe. And so we have an open communion rail. And so part of my job, as I see it, is to help folks find a place to worship on the regular while we build the table. But the other thing that's important to note, Greg, is that the table, by its very design, is going to serve a community with very specific needs. Mm-hmm. We do not have, in the Deep South, a ministry like the Table that is centering marginalized and vulnerable populations, particularly LGBTQ persons and those impacted by incarceration. Mm-hmm. There isn't one that exists. And so by its very nature, there is a need that needs to be filled. We'll start with small gatherings. Support groups are really big, and that's a place that I've been asked to start, particularly in the trans community. Mm. Our first group that we're going to start is a support group for folks who have surgery, who are lacking encouragement and support post surgical transition.
I love that so much. I think there is such a big need for all of those things, for just connecting folks here in town, especially at a time where people seem to be, and statistically are, lonelier than ever, especially here in Nashville, where there are so many more transplants than there used to be. It takes years to find your support in any place. So I think that's great. I want to ask one last question. We're chatting at a particularly fascinating moment, I think, for where you are in your career now as a pastor. Kind of this turning point, this edge. What hope do you have? Maybe what prayer do you find yourself praying right now as you step into this new ministry and into this new part of your identity?
The very first day of seminary, I realized I was in way over my head. One of the professors was addressing us and speaking about the vulnerability of what it is you're about to embark on. And I did not realize the losses that I was about to incur. I also didn't realize the dismantling that I was going to experience and the ways in which God already knew what God called me to do and was going to be there with me all the way through and then some into the future. And the two snippets I will leave you with are this. The professor said to the group, if you give to God all the broken pieces of your life, I'm going to cry. If you give God all the broken pieces of your life, God is so good that God will rearrange the pieces and make something new and beautiful. He was talking about a stained glass window and the windows in a church, and how even when there's only one color in the shards of glass, that they make this beautiful image. And so he said, we all have broken pieces. And if you give God all your broken pieces, God will rearrange them and make a new window, and it will be beautiful. So that's my invitation. Come to the table and bring all your broken pieces, and we'll rearrange them right there on the table. The table of love, the table of grace, the table of mercy. We'll rearrange those pieces, and together we'll make something new and beautiful. And the other prayer is important. My very first day of seminary, when I realized I was in over my head, I made this teeny weeny little Post-it note and I stuck it on my computer, and it's many years old now and tattered, but I find myself praying it every day, sometimes several times a day, because I still use the same computer. And the prayer I wrote was very simply this. It was my heart then, it's my heart now. It said, Abba God, thank you for the opportunity to grow in my knowledge of you. Grant me this day a clear mind, quiet time, and a willing heart to learn. Amen.
Amen. On that note, thank you for sharing your heart with us on this episode and reminding us that we're all continuing to learn on this journey.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's just been a gift. Like every other part of God's creation, this too is a gift. You're a gift. What you do for the beloved community is a gift, and your partnership and your friendship, that too is a gift. So thank you.
A special thanks to Dawn for coming on the show. You can find her on Instagram at her handle, Dawn Did This. I love that handle. You'll find that link in the show notes along with other resources mentioned in this episode. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Our editor is Carrie Harmon, and our theme music is by JP Ruggieri. We recorded this episode here in Nashville, Tennessee at the We Own This Town studio. And a special thanks this week to Patreon members Will Potter, Austin Kubanek, and Nada Delvarpour for their support. Remember, you can become a member and get access to exclusive digital content and merchandise starting at just $1 a month. Learn more at patreon.com/OutLoudStories. You can also leave us a one-time donation over on Venmo at OutLoudStories. And if you haven't already, please be sure to leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, hit that subscribe button so you get the latest episodes right when they drop. For more updates, you can find us on social media at OutLoudStories, and you can sign up for our email newsletter on our website at OutLoudStories.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. In the meantime, remember, friends, queer people have faith lives too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thanks for listening.